Hello everyone, welcome to a new video of my channel, The Mental Traveler. I'm Caro and today I will be reviewing the novel Sweet Francaise. I'm really happy to be doing this video because ever since I watched the movie adaptation, I've been dying to read the book and talk about it, and now I can finally do it. It has a really good plot and great characters, an amazing story behind its creation and publication. It has a very important historical impact. Before I go into details as to why this book is so good, I should probably say that although it was written in 1942, it was not published until 2004. It was written by Irène Némirovsky, and she had this really interesting and tragic life. She was born in Kiev at the start of the 20th century to a rich banking family, but thanks to the Russian Revolution she had to flee to France. And in Paris she studied at the Sorbonne, and Némirovsky was writing since a very early age. By the time World War II broke out, Irene was already a published famous author, and as she saw how all of these really important events were happening around her, she began writing Sweet Francaise. But this is not a diary where she is a protagonist. Rather, she invents all of these characters and situations based on what she was seeing and hearing once Germany occupied France. And she fills her book with all of these insightful reflections as to what the war really meant. And it's really poignant because it shows how people who were actually experiencing the war were not only aware of what a horrible thing it was for them, but also to humanity as a whole. And Sweet Francaise was supposed to be made out of 5 books, but the author could only write 2 for 2 reasons. She could not finish the last 3 till she knew how the war ended, and because she was taken to a concentration camp as she was writing the 3rd novel. She died at Auschwitz after a month. She was 39, and she was arrested because of Jewish descent. Once Irene is taken away, the manuscript for Sweet Francaise was kept by her 2 small daughters who had to flee from the Nazi soldiers for the remaining years of the war. Even after World War II ended, they didn't want to read the manuscript because they thought it was a diary of their mother and it would be too painful to read it. But when one of her daughters finally read it in 2003 or something, she saw it was a book and thus it was published. Before I go into details as to what the story is about, I want to say that I have the ebook version of Sweet Francaise, and it comes with a lot of really interesting side notes and with a lot of fascinating material besides the actual story. For example, we get to read Némirovsky's notes and manuscripts regarding the last 3 books of Sweet Francaise, so we know the general outcome of what the characters were going to live through after the 2nd novel. And I also got to read a lot of her reflections of the war, and I think that she really managed to capture all of her reflections into the novel. I got to read a lot of her letters where she pleads with her friends to help her get food or money so she could sustain her family, and it was heartbreaking because she loved to write. She couldn't publish what she was writing because of the new racial laws that didn't allow Jewish people to publish books. And once she's taken to Auschwitz, we read all of the letters her husband sent to a lot of people. Finally, this will be a review with spoilers, so beware. The novel is meant to show different characters, aspects, stories once the Nazi soldiers arrived at France. Each of the 5 books were meant to portray the invasion at different stages. The first part details how the Parisians flee the French capital once the Nazi soldiers are about to arrive at Paris. We get to experience this exodus through a lot of different point of view characters. Some of them are an upper middle class family and its members, a priest, a teenage boy, the matriarch of the family, but there is also a self-centered writer, an elderly married couple, and even some of the country folk that take in the Parisians who are fleeing. I personally prefer the next book, but I found this one really interesting because all of the people we read about have a very different take on the war and what it means, and also because a lot of them keep on reflecting about World War I, and since that's my favorite period in history, I like reading about the survivors of the Great War and what they were thinking once the Second World War broke out. This is my favorite part, and the movie adaptation I talked about earlier is based on this one. And in Dolce there are 2 stories going on, and one of them talks about the way the village of Bussy and its inhabitants deal with having all of these Nazi soldiers arriving and settling at the town. Some of them warm up to the Nazis, but others don't even think of them as human beings. And as with the previous part, the author shows all of these different point of views and takes on Nazis. Dolce stresses a lot with a woman's position during this time when men are away at war and women are left behind. And it was fascinating the way that Some of them had even lost family because of the Germans in either World War I or World War II, and yet they couldn't help themselves at times. Some of them even fell in love with the Nazi soldiers. All of these moral questions are really tricky, but the author deals with them really good, and it sets you thinking, so that's a good thing when you're reading a book. I don't know what I would have done had I been in the position of this woman. And the other story that Dolce portrays in detail is that of Lucille and Bruno. Lucille is a very beautiful young woman whose husband is away at war. Lucille lives with her mother-in-law in like the nicest house at the town, and a German officer called Bruno is stationed to live with them, and throughout the months that they're together they begin to develop feelings for each other. But of course a lot of things stand in their way. But if you read Dolce, you'll learn if they manage to end up together or not. Characters from the first and second book meet in Paris, and some of them join the communist resistance. Some are arrested, some fall in love, some die, some prosper, and some of them survive the war. And I know all of this because, as I mentioned, the author left behind her manuscripts and the outline of what she wanted for the last 3 books to deal with. And the story that most appeals to me is that of Lucille. Another man appears in her life, and I would have loved to read about how she copes with this struggle because she loves Bruno, but then this other man comes, and apparently she also develops very strong feelings for him. But it also would have been very interesting to learn about the historical events that were happening in Paris during the last 3 years of the war. I think Némirovsky did a wonderful and outstanding job with her novel. I adored the way there are so many different points of views portrayed in the stories, because it made me wonder which one I identified the most with. And I always kept wondering how many of her characters were based on real people. That made me feel even more for the characters because they're based on real persons. And I also love the novel because it reminded me of my favorite book, Gone with the Wind. They both deal with women being left behind as the men go off to war and how they have to survive. Finally, I reviewed Sweet Francaise with a 5 out of 5 stars review because the way the author handles landscapes, history, characterization, the characters' backstories, their opinions, isn't confusing. There's a nice balance between all of these elements. But the reason why I prefer Dolce to The Storm in June is because it's more romantic. I think the movie doesn't only capture the essence of the book, but it also improves it at times. Lucille's mother-in-law, I think she's better explored in the movie. And the relationship between Bruno and Lucille, I preferred it in the film. But even though the novel is a masterpiece, I think I prefer the movie. Not only because it's more romantic, but also because it made me even connect with the characters more and feel more empathy for them. Some small differences could be that Lucille is more naive in the movie and Bruno is older in the film as well. So this was my book review for Sweet Francaise. I hope you liked it. Let me know what you think of it. It's such a precious story, so I hope that you can all discuss with me what you think of it, whether it's the book or the novel or both. Or we could even talk about the author's life, the novel's historical meaning. I will be looking forward to your comments. In the meantime, you can find in the description box below a link to the Goodreads page for the novel, as well as a link to my movie review of Sweet Francaise. I'm Gara, the Mental Traveler. Thank you for watching this video. I will see you later.